Well, it's Election Day 2025 here in Washington, D.C., and just about everybody in the chattering class agrees that two of the most important states on the map tonight, New York and Virginia. In New York, obviously the New York City mayoral election between Zohran Mamdani and Andrew Cuomo, and of course Curtis Lewa, is probably going to be the most watched race in the entire country because, as we have covered here for months, Mamdani is a 33-year-old Democratic Socialist state senator who was written off by the establishment that rallied behind Andrew Cuomo in the primary and then again in the general election. Mamdani's candidacy has divided the Democratic establishment. Just today, on Election Day, Chuck Schumer, the lead Democrat in the Senate, has refused to say who he voted for in the mayoral election. Sounds a lot like he voted for Andrew Cuomo, of course, but those are the dynamics that are on the line in New York City. On the other hand, down here closer to Washington, D.C., in Virginia, you have the race between Winsome Earl-Sears and Abigail Spanberger. You also have the Republican Attorney General candidate, Jason Miyares, going up against the Democratic Attorney General candidate, Jay Jones. That race, it is a state attorney's general race, has also become competitive for the title of most watched race in the country. Now, of course, it would be impossible to topple Mamdani's race in New York City, especially as a state attorney general race. But the state attorney general race, we talked about, go watch our video if you need to catch up on kind of what was happening behind the scenes. But basically, text messages from the Democratic candidate were released saying just awful things. This was around the time of the Kirk assassination. Awful, awful things about a Republican in the state of Virginia wanting his family to suffer and to feel pain, all of that. It's been on the line in Virginia, and it has been, Virginia right now has a Republican governor. Virginia is really not a red state. It's really not even a purple state. It's a blue state. But Glenn Youngkin's win during COVID was one of the biggest points that sort of realignment we've seen happen over the last 10 or so years. It happened on the back of culture war politics that Republicans saw as being kind of finally used politically to elect Republicans. So Youngkin ran, again, in the middle of COVID against CRT, against extreme policies on Title IX or transgenderism with bathrooms and locker rooms and sports teams. He ran on parents' choice, all of that. So Abigail Spanberger ahead in the polls, looking pretty comfortable for her. Jay Jones, on the other hand, it's possible in the state of Virginia, he loses. And you have a Democratic governor in Abigail Spanberger, former CIA, staunch Democratic establishment person who has been running against DOGE and the cuts to federal workers that hit Virginia especially hard given its location outside of the nation's capital. She may have a Republican attorney general in Jason Miyares, somebody who is seen absolutely as a rising star in the GOP. So we have a special show today. I'm really excited about this. We are going to start with our revolution and then hear from the Republican Attorneys General Association. So we're going to start with a representative from our revolution, which is a Bernie Sanders aligned group, really the Bernie Sanders aligned group, and hear from the left about Zohran winning potentially in New York City, likely winning in New York City tonight, what it means, what precipitated it, what factors were really important, what's happening actually on the ground, not just the media spin. And then we're going to go and bring in the Republican Attorneys General Association, hear from somebody, the executive director over at the Republican Attorneys General Association, about what they're hearing on the ground. That race is much more unsettled. If you're looking at the polling right now, it's unclear what's going to happen. That one could genuinely be a surprise tonight in either direction. It's looking like Mamdani has a pretty comfortable lead in the polls. This one, the Attorney General race is a toss-up. So I thought it would be helpful to zoom into New York City, then zoom into the campaign trail in Virginia, and just listen to what you're hearing from the left and from the right, and try to understand what this means about the entire results as they're digested tomorrow, as we start thinking about them, talking about them tonight. The messaging is really interesting. So let's go ahead and start in New York City and bring our guest in. Well, we have a big guest with us as voters head to the polls in New York City. Joseph Geevarghese, Executive Director of Our Revolution. Joseph, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Now, our revolution it has to look back on the last 10 years feeling pretty good about the organizing efforts that you all have put into places like New York City. So I just wanted to see if you could maybe reflect on what that's been like over the last 10 years as progressives have tried to sort of wrest back control of the party from, anybody who might try to undermine Bernie Sanders and others, and now on the cusp of this massive surprise victory. If you told someone a year ago, surprise victory in New York City, what's that been like?
Yeah, look, I think the decade subsequent to Bernie's first run in 2016 has been transformational in resetting progressive politics and informing democratic politics in the United States. It was not a one and done race with Bernie. Bernie really did inspire a new generation of young people to run for office, right? You've got people like Ilhan Omar, people like AOC, Ayanna Pressley. You saw a movement begin to mature from not just running in elections and beginning to win, but then actually exercising power. For example, in the formation of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, that had been in place for a while, but they acted, almost like a parliamentarian voting bloc during the Biden years and exercised, I would say, outsized power for a small group of folks who usually were dismissed by the Democratic establishment. And so, I think this is, when we think about Zoran's race and we think about where we are in the country, I think what this says most of all is that the progressive movement is not dead, and it continues to build momentum as we go forward. And I think Zoran, a victory in that race, I think is going to open the door to a lot of new faces running in 2026 and beyond.
There was a moment over the summer where the Mamdani campaign held a scavenger hunt. I think it was on a Saturday. It was on a weekend. And droves, seemingly, of young New Yorkers came out to participate in a political campaign scavenger hunt. Could you talk to us a little bit about the momentum in terms of just like organizing? Because most people who go to vote aren't involved in organizing. They're not going on scavenger hunts. They're not even that involved in the electoral side of it. But what did you all see over the last several months during the general election campaign?
So we focused our GOTV efforts, our electoral efforts on about 500,000 voters. And what we heard was that it was the platform and the issues that motivated folks. At the end of the day, people find their lives to be completely unaffordable. When you talk about paying the rent or trying to buy a place to live or sending your kid to daycare, or paying for, the bus fare or the metro or subway. And what was significant was that, it wasn't that he was just young and dynamic. Of course, that played a factor. He was social media savvy. But the top line was his message resonated. Right. There wasn't anyone we really spoke with who disagreed that, the standard, their standard of living is declining. Life is becoming too expensive. And at the end of the day, I think it was a message coupled with a charismatic messenger that inspired, young people to come out. I think there is a backdrop of Trumpism and, let's send a message to the Democratic establishment and to Donald Trump. I think there's an element of that. But at the end of the day, I think it's a message, it's the same message that Bernie ran on in 2016, that other progressives have run on. And, I think that's going to carry Zoran to victory.
I'm really glad you brought that up. It's actually just where I was going to go because you all have been around, as I said earlier, throughout this whole arc, and the history is so interesting, as you were just explaining. To me, it seems like Bernie Sanders, and I would also say Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and particularly Zoran, have been laser focused on a messaging of affordability in a way that's a slight shift, actually, since probably the 2020 presidential primary, Democratic presidential primary, some of the 2018 midterm messaging. It's a little bit more debatable back in the 2016 Bernie campaign, but there's just a laser like focus. And I wanted to ask if you see that as sort of an evolution and maybe a model for Mamdani to set as other maybe DSA aligned or Bernie aligned progressive candidates or Democratic Socialist candidates are running in races around the country in the midterm cycle.
So I'm not sure. Maybe the terminology of affordability is and how it's being talked about is new. But that being said, I think, for the Bernie Sanders wing or the Warren wing of the Democratic Party, we have been focused on raising the standard of living for American people. And so, in 2016, whether that was condemning free trade deals, just like Donald Trump was, or fighting for 15 or a living minimum wage, fighting for affordable health care. All of those things actually do come back to making life affordable for people. There may be some packaging that's a little bit different.
Even just the example of how Zoran has handled the police question, I think is maybe instructive.
And in terms of, just to clarify.
So going from posting about defunding the police and organizing for defunding the police back in 2020 to saying, I'm actually talking to NYPD officers and in conversations with them, I've apologized. Just how he sort of says he's come to see that issue differently in this campaign running against Cuomo and all of that.
Right. Well, yeah, what I would say is I would even argue, I mean, I do agree that, we focused on economic issues, the progressive wing, and that's what's carrying Mamdani in this moment. And then I think some of those issues like defund the police, may have gotten manipulated or, taken out of context. At the end of the day, I think about Attorney General Keith Ellison and the way he explained, we're really, defunding the police is really a misnomer. What we're talking about is how do we invest in our communities and in providing the services that would make our communities a lot safer. So, I think there are probably some radical elements that say abolish the police, defund them completely. But really, the message is like, let's think about a different paradigm about community safety, right? Let's talk about mental health services. Let's talk about meeting basic human needs. As a way to make sure that everyone's safe. I think there is probably an evolution. It is. It's an evolution in terms of messaging at the very least, right? And being clearer about where the focus should be.
So interesting. And my last question is conservatives. Some of my friends right now are saying they're freaking out. They are saying this is the ushering in of the
end times.
Yeah, exactly. This is the DSA takeover of the Democratic Party. This is the Bernie takeover of the Democratic Party. And I wanted to put that question to you, Joseph, because it's sort of hard to deny if Zoran wins tonight, especially with a healthy margin. It looks like this is the Bernie takeover of the Democratic Party. Do you interpret it that way?
I wish I could be as,
confident.
I wish I could share that. I don't, unfortunately, look, the Democratic establishment, we've been fighting them, as you said, for over a decade and even longer. I think this will be a shot across the bow that, the party establishment cannot ignore us or write us off in 2026. But that being said, I don't think that, all of the mainstream, the establishment, I mean, Chuck Schumer still has not
That's right.
said, would not endorse and has not said who he voted for. At the end of the day, we still have to deal with the Chuck Schumers who are in power and control the levers within the Democratic, Party. So I think it's a big win for us. It'll give us momentum and energy. But that being said, the establishment still runs the party. They still are the gatekeepers. And we're still going to have to fight them in the trenches. But a win for Mamdani gives us hope that we can get it, we can do it.
So interesting. Joseph, thank you for taking the slice of time on what is, I know, a very busy day. We appreciate it a lot.
Thank you.
Well, we're joined now from Virginia Beach by Adam Piper, who's executive director over at the Republican Attorneys General Association. Adam, thank you for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
Of course. Now, this race in Virginia, this attorney general race in Virginia, has become one of the biggest races in the country. It was already an interesting race, but after the J. Jones text leaked to National Review originally, it blew up. So tell us, you're in Virginia Beach. It's about midway through Election Day. What's your sense of the kind of ground game right now?
We're feeling good right now. It's all about turnout. But about an hour ago, we had yet another J. Jones mishap. This guy can't keep helping himself. He tried to kick a puppy dog at a polling place. Unfortunately, that's not a joke. So if the J. Jones wanting to kill kids, if the J. Jones wanting to kill political opponents, if the J. Jones wanting to kill cops weren't bad enough, now the guy's at a polling place wanting to try to kick a puppy dog.
Have you found crossover Spanberger Jones voter or people who are voting for Abigail Spanberger and not voting for Jay Jones?
I delivered, we got up at when polling places open at 6 a.m. and we were handing out some J. Jones get out the jail free cards like these right here to voters and also some coffee and donuts to poll workers. And I was shocked that there were Democrat poll workers here in Virginia Beach who not only were taking get out of jail free cards, but were also appreciative of the coffee as well. And were voting for Jason Miyares. So you had people working polling locations for the Democratic Party wearing Abigail Spanberger materials, stickers like I didn't vote for Jay Jones sticker I'm wearing right now, who were voting for Jason Miyares. Jason Miyares posted a video a couple hours ago in Stafford County, which for those non-Virginians is Fredericksburg, where he was talking to a poll worker who once again was working the precinct for Abigail Spanberger and was voting for Jason Miyares. I think we are seeing right now that decency is on the ballot in Virginia. This is a matter of, regardless of partisan stripe, do you want someone who stands for political violence? Do you want someone to be the top cop who wants cops to die? Or do you want there to be some form of civility in Virginia politics? At the end of the day, I think Virginians will agree with Larry Sabato, who's not a conservative at the University of Virginia, that politics is a good thing, and we need decency in the Attorney General's office.
Well, tell us about how you've seen Miyares capitalize on Jones's obvious weakness, as even some Democratic candidates in Virginia ultimately admitted, even though they didn't unendorse him or anything like that. But the obvious weakness exposed by these text messages, honestly, he's clearly not an A+ candidate for Democrats in this Attorney General race. So talk to us about how you've seen Miyares kind of capitalize on that. It's not just that Jay Jones is a weak candidate, but I imagine from your perspective, it's that Miyares has been in a position to kind of capitalize as a good candidate for Republicans.
Jay Jones is already branded as soft. No cash bail, no school resource officers, no sexual assault reporting in schools before the scandals. We've had 2 scandals break. It wasn't just the text messages. It was also the fact that he's under criminal investigation with a special prosecutor for defrauding a judge in a court of law, which is why we have to get out of jail free cards. The way we've seen the Miyares campaign capitalize is the same way the Republican Attorneys General Association has capitalized. There's been an infusion of financial resources. This is the most expensive Attorney General's race in American history. It probably is the most impactful Attorney General race in American history. We being the Republican Attorney General Association, have contributed over $10 million directly to Jason Miyares. We've also have a joint venture for get out the vote efforts and early voting efforts with the Republican State Leadership Committee. We are more financially invested in this race than any committee in Washington, D.C. How we've capitalized on it, it comes down to making sure voters are aware of Jay Jones's character. And right now, we've seen polling that shows over a majority of Virginians have a very unfavorable opinion of Jay Jones, and a majority of Virginians think Jay Jones should have dropped out. If Jay Jones was a Republican, it wouldn't be on a podcast. It'd be on NBC, CBS, ABC, covering this nonstop. Instead, NBC covered it for 60 seconds, and the other 2 alphabet networks spent 0 seconds covering probably the most disgusting series of political discourse in American history. Jay Jones was unhinged, not because he disagreed with someone on the floor of the legislature or someone had screwed him over on a piece of legislation. He was unhinged because how dare a Republican Speaker of the House, say nice things about a Democrat who had died at a funeral. Jay Jones was not upset because of something that was provoked. This was unforced, unhinged behavior because, God forbid, Republicans and Democrats work together.
And what policy questions do you believe are on the line with, that sort of banner question of character? How could the character of the next Virginia Attorney General translate into different sort of policy decisions for the average Virginia voter? What are you guys talking about, and the kind of consequences of the election either way?
I was just eating in a barbecue restaurant. I ate in about 2 seconds before I hopped on here with you, and there was a little plaque on the wall with an end of watch for a Virginia Beach police officer. For those that are unaware, end of watch is a funeral for a police officer. If you haven't been to an end of watch funeral, it's probably the most gut wrenching thing ever. When I was the chief of staff to an attorney general in South Carolina, I went to a couple, and you remember the names. Gregory Alia repeated 3 times, end of watch, and they say the date. You will never forget that recording. Jay Jones thinks cops should die because that's how policies will change. So when we think about policy implications on this race, Jay Jones won't be able to do his job as Attorney General because police officers will not work with him. Every law enforcement group in the Commonwealth of Virginia have called for Jay Jones to drop out. Even Abigail Spanberger, his running mate at the top of the ticket, disagrees with him on qualified immunity. Jay Jones is going to have an issue where the national AG groups, the bipartisan ones, won't be able to have Jay Jones there because Republicans will not show up. Democrats will not be able to have him join coalitions because they are going to be haunted by his text messages and his views, in probably the greatest way we've ever seen in political history. This is a defining moment, not just in terms of attorney general policy, but American political discourse. The Democratic Party has enjoyed this, quote, moral high ground and high horse. When the reality is they're riding around on one of those kids' horses on a broomstick. And so the Democratic Party carries Jay Jones across the finish line. It will be the most disgusting display of partisanship in American history. But I don't think Virginia voters are political pawns. They can think and act for themselves. And I think at the end of the day, you'll probably see a Democrat governor, a Democrat lieutenant governor, and a Republican attorney general. And that will not be the first time that occurred in Virginia political history.
Last question, Adam, is to what degree, I mean, there was this proximity between the Jay Jones text first breaking and the tragedy of Charlie Kirk's assassination. And just wanted to ask, as you've been out on the trail talking to voters, what effect does that seem to have had on the electorate in Virginia? Did that really ripple through people's minds as they considered who to vote for this year?
I think it rippled through. I think the one challenge we have in to manage expectations is that occurred a month ago. Virginians have been voting for 45 days. Virginia is an unfettered early voting state going back to September 19th. There's been 45 days of nonstop voting. Last week, we had one of the most disgusting displays of partisanship by Speaker Don Scott and Senator Louise Lucas. They had a special session on redistricting to change the narrative. And we felt the momentum shift a little bit because it was not voters talking about the real issues. It was a sham Democrat session to distract from Jay Jones scandals. Same thing on the Charlie Kirk standpoint. That was a month ago. I think it has energized some of our folks in the younger generations. I think it has also brought up the standpoint with both the Charlie Kirk assassination, where fascists were printed on the bullet. It said, hey, fascist, eat this or catch this. I can't remember the exact phrasing. But you also had Jay Jones saying in a text message that he wanted the children of a politician to die, who are 2 and 5 years old. I have a 5 and an 8-year-old at home as a father. He wanted them to die because they were, quote, little fascists. And this word has to be given up by the left. They can't call us fascists anymore. I've written 2 op-eds about it. It is disgusting. It is a dog whistle. It is saying they're okay with us dying as Republicans. No one should lose their life because of their political viewpoints. Period. End of story. But Jay Jones views that's fine. Same thing with Charlie Kirk. The left has had this disgusting display of partisanship that just because Charlie Kirk was a conservative, just because a Republican speaker was a conservative, that it's fine for them dying because they do not fit into their cute, cozy, woke ideology. We have to do better as Americans.
Adam, thank you so much for your time on what is absolutely a busy day on your end. We appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me. Look forward to joining you soon.
Okay, so a couple of takeaways from me, just quickly, having heard from both Joseph and Adam. I thought Joseph really made an interesting point about the establishment not being done yet. It's like if Zohran Mamdani wins, it's a sign that the Bernie wing is ascendant, but probably not that the Bernie wing is in complete and total control. I also thought it was interesting to hear a little bit of pushback on the idea that Mamdani, as I see it, I mean, I think it was totally interesting and fine to hear the premise of my question challenged, but that is my belief that Mamdani has been really careful about keeping his focus on affordability, arguably moderating on the question of police, at least in terms of the policies that he's putting forward, saying he doesn't support these broad measures calling for defunding the police. But our revolution, I think, is understandably a bit sensitive to the narrative that that's a big change, because they've been standing aside these kind of progressive candidates when it hasn't been easy to stand beside progressive candidates that are getting attacked relentlessly by the Democratic Party establishment over the last decade. So I also thought that was interesting, and we'll see what happens going forward. And from Adam, man, he's saying that this is like the most expensive attorney general race in American history. Like, how crazy is that? And it's clearly because Republicans realized in the aftermath of Charlie Kirk's assassination and the aftermath of these text messages being leaked, that those two, the confluence of those two events created a really powerful messaging opportunity. Jones is, Spanberger, I also don't think is like a brilliant candidate for Democrats in Virginia. She's the type of candidate you kind of have to run for Democrats. I think she's a little stiff and awkward as a candidate, to be honest. Not as politically talented, certainly, as like a Glenn Youngkin, or certainly like as a Mamdani, that's for sure. But it's, for Virginia, a long time red state, now pretty solidly a blue state, there's still remnants. I mean, if you get outside Northern Virginia, there's a lot of deep red pockets. And so you can understand why they thought they needed to run somebody like Abigail Spanberger, who looks like she's in pretty good shape. One of the things I'm watching for is just how much she wins by. Is it more than Ralph Northam won by in Trump 1.0? I think it was 2017 when Northam originally won. But Republicans felt like, they had a big gift. So the question is, can Spanberger pull Jay Jones over the edge? Because people just vote down ballot so partisan now. You're just kind of filling out your ballot for Democrats or filling out your ballot for Republicans, and in a Dem heavy state, and in a year where obviously, if you're the opposing party as the president and who's holding the government in a midterm cycle, you usually have an advantage running against the current situation. So there's this also a pretty interesting number here, actually, that Politico highlighted. Quote, history suggests a tough road for the GOP this year. For half a century, with one exception, Virginia voters have favored gubernatorial candidates from the party that is not in the White House. Only Terry McAuliffe broke that tradition in 2013. So we'll see if Spanberger has a big enough victory to pull Jay Jones over the edge. But that's one to watch for sure, because Republicans feel very confident that in a moderate state like Virginia, a little bit mixed, even if it leans blue, in a moderate state like Virginia, you can beat Jay Jones on this question of civility. And as we heard from Adam, saying character is on the ballot, see if that message is enough to topple Jay Jones in a pretty blue state. All right, everyone, Election Day. I know you love it. And I know you'll be glad. You love it because you're glad to see an end to the ads if you're in an area where there's a big race. So thanks so much for tuning in. Really appreciate it. Premium subscribers, you can get a premium subscription over at undercurrents.tv. Make sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube as well. We'll see you back here with more soon.